Now, before getting into it, let me warn you, there are going to be some pretty major spoilers for the latest episode of Ahsoka in this video, that of course being the 5th episode. So if you haven't seen it yet, and you don't want anything ruined, it's a really good time to click away. Alright, so once again, with this latest episode of Ahsoka, I've already seen a wide array of different takes and opinions. I have certainly seen a lot of people that have very much enjoyed it, which is a category I fall into. And I've also seen those who either didn't like it so much, or who maybe had issues with it, or just found it a bit strange and confusing overall. There have also been those that hated it and are tearing it apart for various reasons, some of which I will cover in this video, and some of which I think are perhaps a bit disingenuous, or are being put out there by people who are maybe missing the obvious. And don't get me wrong, pick it apart all you want. I myself have pointed out or agreed with many issues that are being put out there. It has been far from perfect, and I get why some people are not enjoying it. But if you're going to point out the flaws, at least strive to be fair about it. Don't hate just to hate, or you become the very thing they say you are. Not to mention, as I've pointed out before, if you truly care, if you want Star Wars to get better, well, they are going to ignore you if all you do is complain all the time. You have to acknowledge the good, the little bit that there may be sometimes, to at least keep up the illusion of being objective. But anyway, getting back to it, I do think this wasn't exactly the clearest episode ever, and I'm not just talking about the fog of war during the Clone Wars parts. I don't think, especially if you're new to the world between worlds, if you didn't see Rebels or you've never heard about it at all, I don't think it was exactly easy to understand what was going on here, if it was a dream, if it was a Force vision, or something else entirely. But the thing is, even if you do know about all that, if you know about the world between worlds, you saw it in Rebels and so on, there's still plenty of debate to be had about what happened here. I've seen a lot of people asking if that was the real Anakin Skywalker and if Ahsoka was really in the world between worlds, or if it was just all in her mind. And for better or worse, I do think that was Filoni's intent with the episode. I do think he wants you asking all of these questions and not being 100% sure about what just happened. He has talked before about leaving things open to interpretation, especially when they involve the Force, instead of just fully explaining them to you, which I think is good. I think you don't want to fully map out the Force and explain it all. And this episode was very much an example of Filoni keeping things rather vague. I think he wants us fans, in a civilized manner of course, I think he wants us talking amongst ourselves about what we just saw and what it meant, instead of the episode just plainly laying it out for us, or even him coming out after the fact to tell us what it all meant. And yeah, I do think it is more fun this way, and that there should be forever an air of mystery around the Force. One of the reasons, for example, some hate something like the introduction of the midichlorians so much, is they take the wonder and mystery away from it and begin to quantify the Force. They make it more scientific than magical. That said, the Filoni approach can be a tad bit frustrating at times, especially when there are things that don't involve the Force that are maybe a bit confusing about the show, that don't need to be confusing either, and I think he should just come out and give us an answer outside of the show. And who knows, maybe he will soon enough. Maybe he's just waiting for it to be over before giving us some answers to questions that shouldn't have been a mystery. And what I'm talking about here are things like Ahsoka the White. I've seen people ripping on the fact that she becomes Ahsoka the White again because they now believe, right or wrong, that the Rebels epilogue and the scene at the end of Season 2 were different events. That the one in Rebels was the first time Sabine and Ahsoka go off together, and the one in the Ahsoka series now is the second time, and for some reason she ditched the White, as well as the staff that we've yet to see in the series, but now she's gone back to it. But I think it's made pretty clear by this latest episode that, again, for better or worse, he's retconned Rebels and that this is the new first appearance or first coming of Ahsoka the White. That she has now let go of the pain of her past, the pain that went along with or was caused by what happened to Anakin, and she has moved beyond all that and become someone kind of new, essentially. And so, even if other things in this episode are not made crystal clear, and maybe were intentionally made that way, I don't think this is supposed to be a mystery as much as it is one because we have two very conflicting scenes in different shows. And Filoni really should just come out and say if they are one and the same or different somehow. No need for this to be a topic of debate. However, one of the things I do think is very much meant to be something for us to discuss is whether or not this was indeed the real Anakin Skywalker, or perhaps I should say the real Force ghost of Anakin. And personally, I think it was him. I think some of the things he says are huge clues that this is the real him. Like when he mentions in the previous episode that she is here sooner than expected. To me, that's the real Anakin genuinely surprised and giving her a bit of grief that she lost a fight and died. And whether or not she's really dead is yet another thing we can debate, and we'll get more into in just a bit. But another big clue that we were dealing with the real Anakin, or the Force Ghost of Anakin, was during the Siege of Mandalore portion of the Clone Wars stuff, where he mentions how he wasn't at this battle. Which just seems like a rather odd thing for a figment of Ahsoka's imagination to say to her. It sounds like something the real Anakin might be a bit confused by. Either that, or it was simply a way to let the audience who doesn't know this full story between the two characters, for those who never watched Clone Wars or any of that and might be surprised to be seeing these two together during it, it's letting them know that by the end of the war, the two had separated, and that's why you don't see Ahsoka in Revenge of the Sith. Either way, and along with all this, something else I've seen a lot of complaints about already, and I think some are being rather disingenuous with this one, but I've seen complaints that Darth Vader lost yet another fight. That as of late, it feels like he's been doing nothing but losing every time we see him, like in the Kenobi series or in Jedi Survivor. However, and though I do get why some find this rather frustrating, seeing him frequently lose, I think you have to keep in mind with this appearance that, though I believe this to be the real Anakin, I don't think this is the real Darth Vader somehow. I think that's actually made pretty clear by the episode, and it's again a bit disingenuous to say that this is a girl boss moment, that Ahsoka is beating Vader because she's a female character. Anakin literally does say that this is all meant to be a lesson for Ahsoka, one where life or death is on the line, and that if she is ever going to learn to deal with and accept what happened to him, to Anakin, that he fell and became Darth Vader, she's going to have to see that and confront Anakin as Vader head on. In other words, it's just Anakin's Force Ghost taking the visage of Darth Vader as part of a lesson where, no, he's not trying to beat her and kill her, and hence why she ultimately does win. Also, when it comes to all these examples of Vader losing lately, and it's not like there's a ton of them, mind you, but there are several, but I look at it as Vader's way of putting characters over, which is kind of a professional wrestling term, where a more, shall we say, established wrestler will lose to a newer one and make them look good in order to sell them to the fans. And it tends not to hurt the more established wrestler because, well, they are indeed established, and the wrestling crowd or audience these days very much understand that this is all scripted and that it's all part of a story. Just like how, with Vader, we understand that he is very much an established badass character who wins far more fights than he loses. And that sometimes to put a new character over, not that Ahsoka is a new character, not to most of us anyway, but to put her over, you show her defeating Vader, even if that wasn't the real Vader. And again, I do get it. You don't want to show Vader losing all the time, or you will, or maybe have diminished the character. You don't want to do something that tarnishes the legacy of not only one of the greatest Star Wars characters of all time, but quite simply one of the greatest fictional characters of all time anywhere. Not again, anyway. But in this case, again, especially with this not being the real Darth Vader, and keep in mind, if you do think this is a girl boss moment, that in Rebels, when she faces the real Darth Vader, she loses and would have been killed by Vader if not for Ezra saving her. But again, keeping all that in mind, I have no issue with Ahsoka beating Vader in this. Not when it was actually Anakin teaching her a lesson, if not perhaps even just a very vivid or lucid Force stream. That then brings us to yet another complaint I've seen about this episode, which is, how the hell did Ahsoka survive so long in the water? By the fact that it's nighttime when they rescue her or pull her out, it means she has likely spent hours upon hours in there. And no, I'm not going to go with the classic alien excuse that maybe Togruta can survive without oxygen for hours, or that she learned it from Plo Koon or something like that. Instead, I think there are two very simple answers here. Either she, her body, was physically in the world between worlds again, which, yes, we've seen before. We saw Ezra physically enter it in Rebels, and as I just talked about, he pulls Ahsoka into it to save her from Vader. It's either that, or she was dead for several hours and brought back to life by the Force itself, which, okay, that's a lot to process. You can complain that's kind of cheesy or whatever. But considering everything we've seen in Star Wars before, everything from ghosts to immaculate conceptions, well, I guess it only makes sense for a figure to rise from the dead and become a Messiah-like figure. So anyway, those are my thoughts on these controversial parts of the latest episode. I honestly think some are missing a few things about it, intentionally or not. And sure, you can call me a Disney shill now if you want for enjoying the show and doing a little defending of it. Though let me tell you that being one certainly doesn't pay. Disney is certainly not paying me money to talk this show up. And I can tell you firsthand, laying it all on the table for you about YouTube, that I make a lot more money off bad Star Wars than I do good, that there's generally more money in bashing something than praising it. That's just something for you to keep in mind here. Well, that's all I got for you this time. Now it's your turn to take to the comments below and tell me what you think about some of these questions. And if you want even more Ahsoka talk, I will be doing a Let's Talk Some Ahsoka video over on my other channel tomorrow, where I will go over some of the comments and questions left on my review. I also talk Ahsoka every Thursday night on my Discord server, which is a patron exclusive, so if you're interested in that, do check out my link to Patreon in the description below. Either way, leave a comment somewhere and let's talk some Star Wars. And until next time, thanks for watching.